Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fifth part of our Overcoming Digital Divides workshop series, a six-part series presented as a partnership with the Ryerson Leadership Lab, the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, the First Nations Technology Council, and Simon Fraser University's Public Square, and supported by our title sponsor, TELUS. I'm Sam Andrew. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Leadership Lab, and we're thrilled that you're able to join us today for this important conversation. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to recognize those who aren't able to gather here with us today: frontline workers, healthcare providers, caregivers, people with low incomes and disabilities who aren't able to connect, and who this conversation is really intended to serve, those who remain disconnected from quality, safe, reliable internet. And to try and address those gaps, we are making a recording of this conversation, as well as a transcript and a summary of the major takeaways from our conversation available shortly after. This would also normally be the time that I acknowledge our university, and Toronto is on the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, Treaty 13, and the Williams Treaties. But I do feel like that symbolic act rings, a little extra hollow, and I want to acknowledge, more importantly, the grief and trauma from last week's discovery of 215 children in Kamloops. We all share a collective work toward reconciliation and honoring our obligations to these treaties and justice for Indigenous peoples more generally, and are conscious of the urgent need to implement the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And at least through this project, we are trying to do that by amplifying Indigenous voices and making space for hearing about the unique digital divides faced by Indigenous peoples in Canada. Just as one example, still only 1/3 of First Nations reserves are connected to high-speed internet, and lots of work still to do. So thank you, everyone, for being here, and your own contributions to this ongoing work. And I think, the role that community-owned and public internet play is something that we hope to dive into today. So new data was released by Statistics Canada just this week, showing still 6% of Canadians and 17% of those age 65 and older do not have home internet access. And the inability to connect to internet at home means access to public Wi-Fi and internet hotspots is especially crucial. More than 40% of people in Canada say they use public internet at things like businesses, schools, and libraries. And the number of free Wi-Fi hotspots in Canada continues to grow significantly. Our mapping of Toronto's digital divide, a project that the Leadership Lab and the Brookfield Institute led, we surveyed 2,500 Toronto residents and found, for those who didn't have home internet access, 42% relied on the public library to connect, compared to just 16% overall. And access to the internet through public libraries can also help introduce marginalized communities to new technologies, devices, foster community engagement. One group that reached out to us, just as one example recently, was the Toronto South Local Immigration Partnership, that has been doing some interesting research, finding the role that the libraries play to connect newcomers to sufficient internet and employment opportunities. So we have a great panel to dig into the complexities of this and how we expand and connect people using public internet access. So we're excited to introduce them now. So we'll begin with introductory remarks from each panelist, and then we'll be guided by two guiding questions, and I'll talk about that once our panel has had a chance to introduce themselves. And we welcome your feedback throughout, and questions through the chat, and we'll try our best to get to them all. First, we have Alice Shu. She is the manager of the Connected Community and Smart City program at the City of Toronto's Technology Services Division, where she uses data and technology to improve the city's quality of life and establish Toronto's first digital infrastructure plan. The Connected Community team is also leading the work on ConnectTO, a program to create a citywide high-speed internet network to connect underserved areas to reliable internet. And the program will also give the city a direct voice in where broadband internet is delivered, and will help bring affordable internet connectivity to all Torontonians. Lawrence, who was to represent the city, is tied up, and Alice has very graciously stepped in. So welcome, Alice.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you for inviting the City of Toronto to take part of this great series of events. And my sincere apologies that I am not Lawrence, so I will try my best. I can only just be me, but rest assured you are missing out on a great speaker in Lawrence. So it's my pleasure to be here today and to be with the fellow panelists to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in the area of digital equity. Um, and so, you know, as Sam mentioned, my team has been involved in creating the city's digital infrastructure plan. So this is largely our answer to, what kind of digital solutions does the city want to see and build? We have the official plan to build our physical city. We've had a lot of experience with that, but we really haven't connected with the public, with experts like some of you in the audience, about the kind of digital city we want to build. And so my team has largely been involved in envisioning that work and trying to find an area where we can set out the rules, so to speak, on evaluating both the projects we want to take part of and the projects come to us. And so in that work, we realized that we are setting up guiding principles is helpful, and is helpful to guide the conversation with the public. And one of those guiding principles is equity and inclusion. And so when COVID started to become a reality last year, we realized that equity inclusion no longer was just this principle that we wanted to build policies around. It was something that that was affecting people around us. I live in Toronto, and I see people lining up outside of the library, Pam. So I see them trying to use the internet, people with all sorts of setups, because they don't have affordable home internet, where they are. So we started to look at ways to provide some short-term limited relief through that, and I can talk a little bit more about that through the guided questions. But really, we turned our focus away from sort of the abstract to some real projects around how to really close that digital divide. And that's when Sam and his team came in as well to provide us with that great research, so that we can work together to understand the depth and the sort of the texture of digital divide here in the city. So we were lucky enough to work with several colleges, universities here in Toronto, including Sam's team. And so that research, that the surveys, the analysis is really what gave us the impetus and momentum, along with all the community feedback, to move from having a in 2017 we had a broadband study, having sort of a study, to pushing it towards action. So I wanted to spend some of my time today to talk about the ConnectTO work that we are launching, which we see affecting the city in a more long-term way in terms of bringing digital equity into the city. And so we're looking at that work from three perspectives, and hoping to hear from you as well on your thoughts on these. We're looking at the work as, ConnectTO is the first aspect of three is, how do we embed connectivity as something the city just does? When we're building new parks, when we're paving the road, how do we actually add to our assets, as well as to have connectivity as an outcome. So when we're building affordable housing, we're not thinking of connectivity as an afterthought, but it's right there in the center of what we're doing. And the second part is all the social policies and practical policies that come along with that. We need to really understand how digital divide works in Toronto, so that we can address that. And so hoping to work more with Sam and the other teams on that as well. And the last part is the one that have gotten some media attention, and I just wanted to mention that we want to create a program where the city is building and connecting a fiber backbone, right? A broadband fiber backbone, where we put that as well as other assets the city has, working with our friends at Toronto Public Library, working with the TTC, et cetera, to really build a public asset that then can be our input into partnership model with partner or partners, where the ultimate outcome is the public good, that is affordable high-speed internet here in the city. So we're just getting going on that. It's fairly a new program, and really excited to talk about that today. I'm really excited to be on the panel. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Alice. So next, we have Christina de Castel, the Chief Librarian and CEO of the Vancouver Public Library. Christina has held roles across technology, research, and public service in her 20-year career as a librarian. She's passionate about the role of libraries in building communities and exploring ideas, and is fascinated by the way technology is changing how we learn and communicate. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here this morning for this really important conversation. I wanted to talk a bit about what we've been seeing at the library since the beginning of COVID, and then reflect on the past 10 years that I've been working in a very public space and public libraries. And so we really see a strong need for computer access in public libraries, people who are not able to have internet access at home. And so what that looks like in Vancouver is a lot of people who are from the downtown east side who use our computers and our Wi-Fi to connect with their family. We see people who, particularly middle-aged men who live in shelters downtown and use our computers to access government services and also for entertainment and connection. And we see a lot of young people, and often people who are using who are in the city for ESL learning, coming to the library to use the Wi-Fi on our upper floors and coming with their own laptops. While COVID was going on, and particularly in the first few months while libraries were shut down, what we saw was a lot of people sheltering near the walls of the library and using our Wi-Fi connection. So that, however, didn't help all the people who don't have computers or devices. And so the first thing that we did in trying to get services reestablished for the library beyond what we were delivering digitally was opening a computer lab at our central library. And we saw that computer lab without any promotion filled to capacity from the second day. So word of mouth was rapid within the people who are around the library on a regular basis, living in those shelters, coming from the downtown east side, but also from other parts of the city. And we learned through that experience, printing is a really major issue for people. A lot of people might have some kind of device or some kind of ability to connect to the internet, but don't have printers. And so there are parts of processes for government applications, for issues related to job applications that you can't do without printing. So that was very important. We saw a lot of people applying for government support. One though that really struck me and really resonated with the library's role in building connections between community was someone who shared with us that until the library offered computers again, they had not been able to read their email messages. And that meant that when they came back to us in the computer lab, they got all of their happy birthday messages from 2 months earlier. So no ability to connect without the public library. So we were really pleased that we were able to reopen and reestablish computer access immediately. Vancouver was the first library to get computer access back in Canada. And yet this need that was exaggerated during COVID has been true for years. We've been providing free Wi-Fi since 2007. And 10 years ago, it was my responsibility to manage the department that was responsible for technology training. And what we saw then was people learning to use the computer for the first time and coming in and needing to have how to use a mouse explained to them. We always teach very basic computer classes because we need to help people who are coming on for the first time. And the advanced skills like editing sound or video have become increasingly of interest, but those basic computer classes are still necessary. And so one of our branch heads shared with me yesterday that she helped someone this past week who had come into the library to use a computer for the very first time. And she was helping them learn how to use a mouse and how to use the up and down arrow. And the reason they were there was to fill out the census. That the expectation for the census this year was that it be delivered and completed online. And it was possible to get it in print, but it's so much harder to access government services now. So it took this person half an hour to complete the census because it was their first time using the computer, but they were committed and they did it. And I think that's what's been fascinating to see during COVID is the number of people who haven't been motivated to learn how to use a computer or learn how to use digital devices until now. We've seen some incredible learning happening among seniors who just didn't have a reason to take on learning ebooks or at Netflix or those sorts of things up until the point when libraries were closed and they couldn't access books in print. And what we saw is that because they were staying at home, they were now motivated to learn all these new skills. And we were so pleased to be there for them to help them through these steps. And so Senior shared with us recently that she and her husband, who are both in their 70s, had never learned to use ebooks or streaming video before, but had taken this on for the first time, had been walked through all the steps by our digital team and are now enthusiastic learners, completely committed, and really enjoying the benefits of being able to increase the font size on their e-readers and access all of this content from home as they're still feeling cautious about going out. And so that's just a few of the things that we see. The City of Vancouver's digital strategy has recognized the role of the library in bridging the digital divide in our city since it was created about 10 years ago. And we've been able to bring all of the learning of our staff and the experiences of the public into those conversations. And so we're really proud that libraries are seen to be a way to fill these gaps that we haven't yet been able to fill through infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. What rich stories. I love that census anecdote. That's great. Thanks for being here. Our next panelist is Michael Lenzner. He's the CEO of Aja and the founder of ILS Sans Fil, a nonprofit community wireless network that provides free public internet access in Montreal. Michael works in the areas of nonprofit information management and open government and is a frequent collaborator on academic community research partnerships and serves on several nonprofit boards and advisory groups related to technology, democracy, and civil society. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks very much for the chance to participate. I haven't been working as directly in digital divide. We started ILS Sans Fil. ILS Sans Fil is a community wireless network based in Montreal, or that is in Montreal. And we started that in 2003, and that was a volunteer project where we set up just free Wi-Fi because everyone else is doing it, and it was fun for us. And it seemed like a good way for us for a bunch of geeks to use their skills to contribute back to the city. ILS Sans Fil, we kind of got 1,000 hotspots set up. You know, not quickly, but within a number of years, we're kind of one of the more well-known community wireless networks around the world. The style of our form of hotspots of our network was about setting up hotspots. It wasn't about setting up a mesh network that really actually helped people get internet access at home or set up an autonomous network. That was certainly, there are lots of exciting projects doing that. And we were doing very little in that regard, but what we did a lot of it is an experiment about if a community group or community association was operating internet connectivity systems, how would those systems work differently? So we did a lot of work about trying to access geolocated content that was civic, environmental, or cultural, and get it into our system, basically leveraging those portal pages that people had to click through to sign to go to the web. It was very hard back in 2005 to find location-based content that was a civic, environmental, or cultural. So we worked on some really exciting projects back in the day to find out how people could hear from their local MP and trying to see if there were RSS feeds from local MPs' websites that might be running Drupal or WordPress or something else, or the parties, and trying to see how we can really mold or shape or influence our information ecosystem at that local level, and at the time trying to re-inject some geography back in the internet. So that was our work. And ILS Sans Fil still exists today, still on the board. It's called ZAP Quebec. Zone Accès Public is what the names of the organizations here in Quebec are called that are still doing Wi-Fi. And there's several of them. Because there's a good, strong social economy network here in Quebec, there's been support for ILS Sans Fil to become more of a social enterprise. So it really transitioned from a volunteer model to a staff model around 2009. Probably have a different perspective than some of the people are in digital divide, and certainly appreciated the perspective of some of the people are on the call from Penny's, I think it's Goldsmith, but I'm not sure if I have your last name right, Penny. Marita Mull, people that were studying the Connecting Canadians agenda back in like 2000, 2005, and the history of the community access programs that was federally funded, the history of the Community Connecting Canada agenda, which was wildly successful from my understanding of it back in the day. And thinking about where the community fits in this larger question of digital divide. And I think it goes beyond digital divide to who's in control of the technology that is affecting us as a society. But yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Okay. There's lots to dig into there, and I'm excited to do that. But first, let's introduce our final panelist. Pam Ryan is the Director of Service Development and Innovation at the Toronto Public Library. She's also a member of the Urban Libraries Council's Digital Equity Action Team, a team spearheading the council's efforts to establish new models, techniques, and approaches that can help libraries lead their communities into a stronger post-pandemic future. Thanks for being here, Pam.
Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for recognizing the work of public libraries on this topic and inviting both TPL and VPL to this conversation. Public libraries, as Christina mentioned, in Canada have been providing free internet access to computers and internet since there have been public computers and the internet. And we've always seen our role in providing free and equitable access to technology and resources and offering support and training on how to use them and use them safely as our role. And we design our services knowing that both digital access and digital literacy are required for digital equity. TPL has seen many of the same pandemic era stories as Vancouver. So I won't repeat those. It's funny though, I had a number of those listed, but we have had various stages of open and closed throughout the pandemic, following what we've been allowed to do with provincial requirements. But what's interesting is that our lowest level of access has always included computer, printer, scanner, photocopier, and access to our digital innovation hub and creative computers. And I don't want to leave out and washroom access, huge issue. But it hasn't included access to our book stacks. So, let the pandemic be the era when libraries are not just about books, that finally ends. Because what we had prioritized at our 82 open branches of our 100 branches across the city has been that computer access when we've been able to allow folks into the buildings. As well, throughout the pandemic, though, we worked on a number of other initiatives and support. So we continue to loan our 1,000 Wi-Fi hotspot devices for customers that need home internet access. And with the support of the Toronto Public Library Foundation and the city's emergency funding, we raised over $1 million to support a new internet connectivity kit program to get a free laptop and a Wi-Fi device with a 2-year unlimited data plan to be able to distribute those kits through community agencies who were on the ground with clients of most urgent need for home access. We're still working on those. We're still fundraising for those. But that has been a key, emergency response need. What we have seen from the pandemic is that many of our existing digital inclusion approaches, including that reliance on community-based physical spaces for offering digital access to libraries, they're not a viable long-term digital equity solution. And libraries being open have probably shielded all of us from knowing just how important it was that we actually be working on home-based solutions. So the Urban Library Council Digital Equity Team that was mentioned, this group stood up during the pandemic. The Urban Library Council is a group of the largest libraries across North America. And we came together to work on the need to really spotlight the new approaches that we need to take to make sure everyone, regardless of income, can participate fully in digital life, pandemic era and beyond. It is now very clear that to meet the daily digital needs of students and families and seniors and those most vulnerable, that public libraries have to actively increase that awareness of the digital divide's impact across our communities, but also spearhead and support collective actions such as what Alice spoke about with the city's initiatives to make progress on achieving digital equity. And that we regularly need to be making the case in forums such as this for home broadband and devices being a necessity and the only solution to education and economic divides. So we've never been more certain that achieving that digital equity is a full community responsibility, and it's going to continue to require a sustained collaboration among public, nonprofit, technology, and private sector stakeholders. So thanks. Looking forward to today.
Thank you. This is great. So we're going to move now to our first guiding question. And as I said off the top, we want input from everybody as well. So in the chat, there will be a link to a jam board. And at the top, you'll see the guiding question. We'd love your input, and somebody on the back end will be organizing it. And that first question is, how should Canada expand access and improve the experience of public internet? If you want to add your own comment, you can just add a sticky note, which is a little square with 2 lines on the left side, and we'd love your input. But I'm going to pose that same question now to our panelists. And again, feel free to ask questions or add comments as everyone already is in the chat. So folks, how should Canada expand access and improve the experience of public internet? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so one place to begin is recognizing that public libraries can be the main point of that improved public internet access. One of the things that a lot of people may not be aware of is that the federal government doesn't fund public libraries. So public libraries in Canada are predominantly funded by municipal government and have some provincial funding. So the federal government is often one of the vehicles for trying to improve public internet access in Canada. And the focus has been on the infrastructure and getting out into rural communities. Those rural communities need assistance of federal funding in order to get that computer and internet access into their public libraries at a level that is appropriate for being able to provide the kind of access we're able to provide in cities where we really have that high speed, we have the broadband, we're there, and we're there for people who want to be doing online learning. That is not necessarily the case in our rural libraries. So I think that recognition that when we're trying to get into communities, begin with the public library, then everyone has access, and spread out from there. So federal attention to those kinds of enabling programs would be really beneficial. Another area that we see here that could really be beneficial is touch screens in public libraries. A lot more expensive than your average desktop computer, but people who are learning to use technology for the first time find touch screens much, much easier. And the other thing that's really important here is that we have a really diverse population that speaks a lot of different languages, that is written in a lot of different scripts. And when we use English language keyboards, we're leaving all of those people out of the opportunity to communicate effectively. When we use touch screens, then the keyboard can be on the screen and people can type in their own languages. And so that is not a piece that we have in place right now. And that also makes a big difference for people who are struggling with accessibility for other reasons. And so adaptive equipment in our places where we're accessing public internet, it is something that's really important. It needs to be promoted, and people need to be aware that there are screen readers, aware that there are things to help them use computers available through public libraries, and staff need help to learn how to use that equipment. So those partnerships are important. And then last one is Zoom rooms is the thing we're really talking about these days, that libraries are not really set up to be doing video conferencing. People sit relatively close to each other, much farther apart now during COVID, but they are disturbed when someone is talking and having a conversation in a video conference. So we're talking about adding little phone booth types of infrastructure into our libraries to provide some privacy for people who can't use Zoom at home, don't have those internet connections, don't have a home, and so are depending on the library for their online learning, for their job interviews, for participating in connections with family.
That's great. Great ideas. Anybody else want to jump in? Pam?
I'm just pausing because I'm waiting for Alice to go, because I want to talk about the important role that libraries can support, broader city initiatives. Because Christina spoke so eloquently to the role of libraries. It's just libraries. So I think that's why we're here together. So Alice, why don't you go next?
No pressure, eh, Pam? Okay. This is not what we practiced. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, I think being in the city of Toronto, you don't want to be going first, because people have thoughts about that. Anyway, uh, I think from our perspective, as you can imagine, we recognize that all levels of government have a role to play in this. And there's enough for all of us to contribute to this. I think one of the bigger issues facing our society, because it doesn't just go to like filling out forms like we mentioned earlier, but really it goes to being part of this new world that we're in, right? So be feeling connected, feeling like you're not left out. So from our perspective, as I think last week, there was another announcement for more committed funding from the federal government to support from the Universal Broadband Fund to support initiatives here in Ontario. But I think it's very important for us to make sure that rural and northern communities are connected. Earlier you said, Sam, you mentioned the statistic about only 1/3 of I think you said I don't recall the exact stat. Maybe you can remind me, Sam, about reservations. Was it
about speed? You mean, or no?
No, about
42% of people.
connectivity.
Oh, sorry, 42% of people who didn't have home internet access relied on the library.
Yes.
But I think another thing that it sometimes get lost, and I don't know this is exactly what you're saying, but I maybe just want to share anyway, is people think about the internet speed being a challenge only in rural Canada. And one of the things I liked about doing the Toronto study is Toronto does not have infrastructure challenges. It has the fastest internet infrastructure in Canada, but still fully a third, 38% of Toronto residents had speeds less than 50 megabits per second at home, the CRTC standard. And so again, speaking to, even if it's built, people don't necessarily have the resources to connect. Sorry if that wasn't the point you were making, though.
Yeah, no, Sam, and that's exactly right. And thank you for being so handy with the numbers. But and I think part of the conclusion that we came to from the research that you did and others is that there indeed is a digital divide here in our city. The biggest city in Canada still has a digital divide for people all around us. So, we just want to recognize that it's not necessarily that could you theoretically connect to a high-speed internet when the cost of that is, let's say, $80 a month, and perhaps your OW payment is only, $700 a month. So spending that percentage of your income to be able to stay connected is way too high, and it's simply not affordable for many people in our community. So, from our perspective, of course, our approach is this Connect TO idea. So as you may have heard, Christina and Michael, we're branding things TO all over the city here. So Cafe TO is where we're having outdoor dining, and so Connect TO is our sort of answer to how do we make connectivity a priority through this project. So as Pam mentioned earlier, we're just starting to do this work with the support of Toronto Public Library, et cetera, and finding a more empowered position for the city to say, perhaps the private market hasn't gotten the underserved Torontonians the service that they need, right, on either price point that they can pay. So what can we do as a city from a more long-term perspective that's more resilient to the shocks and stresses that we're feeling, for the long term, to bring truly high-speed internet? Because 5010 is I know is the broadband speed that we're talking about, but we anticipate that there'll be more and more need from our residents and our businesses as we go on, and they can't all go to the Toronto Public Library, even if they have millions of connectivity points each year, right? So from our perspective, again, we're doing the work in both the adding to our physical infrastructure, adding to the way that we work as a city with connectivity, thinking about the policies, looking at the citizen or the resident at the center of how do we, apply the policy, and then going out to look for the partnership to be able to, leverage city assets. So we like to say, unlocking the value in our city assets it's not a city asset, it's public asset. It's you know, it's your assets. So how do we use your assets to get the outcome you're looking for, which is, from what we've heard and what we've seen through your research, Sam, is high speed, you know, affordable internet. So it's not, but I just want to, you know, we're just learning as we go along. Is we went to council in February and they said go ahead, and now we have the lucky situation to like actually implement this program and trying to figure it out. So for phase 1 of the program, we're doing some learning with 3 different spots in the city to do sort of a smaller scope engagement with the private sector or third sector, and see the, you know, really learning about the community response, the market response, and understanding, you know, how do we do something like this. And then after that learning, along with the other research, etc., we'll be going back to city council, hopefully with learning from Toronto Public Library as well, to figure out how do we do this in, you know, in a bigger way. Pam, is that a good enough segue to you?
Thank you, Alice. So how should Canada expand access and improve the experience of public internet? You know, just to follow from Christina, sorry, the first and foremost, we need to continue to support public libraries and recognize them as the core public and social infrastructure that they are, that investing in technology needs sustained and continued support. It's not a one-off, and that we continue to need that support across Canada in every community. As you know, there's more public libraries in Canada than Tim Hortons, and that we need to continue to support the communities in that way and have that as a core support, both for access to technology, but also to the library staff who provide all the supports for whatever use anybody needs while they're in the library. To Alice's point, we know that over 56% of people who use library computers report that library computers and our Wi-Fi are their only computer internet access. So that is those people who are in libraries and who require and need us and have had very few, if not none, options through the pandemic. So we've got those folks covered though when we're open. So who's left? We need to continue to find who's left and to reduce those barriers. So with the work of ConnectTO and how the city is working to help put infrastructure and internet and Wi-Fi into apartment buildings or into community locations, how can the library be involved in putting our community librarians, so folks who already work out in agencies, in shelters, in detention centers, how can they be working in Toronto community housing locations, in seniors buildings, and providing on-site supports for people who may have newfound Wi-Fi because it's been installed? How can we be a pipeline to provide them with free laptops through our foundation and our partnerships and our donors, and to provide people with the access to and to training on-site to reduce those barriers because we can come to them. So those are a whole bunch of models that we're continuing to talk about and work through with the city, and having the library be where people need us to be, and to those who aren't already coming into the library or who can't come into the library to access those services.
Awesome, thank you. There's so many follow-up questions for you, Alice, so you'll be on the hot seat shortly, but I want Michael, for you to get a chance to answer this first.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm involved in this question, as a board member of ILS Network, and we've seen the experience we've had with the City of Montreal being a partner. It took us probably 10 years to get them as a formal partner after we were launched, and then worked with them to increase the amount of hotspots that were branded kind of as Montreal hotspots, put together the city's hotspots and ours, and then we've done a bunch of work. We obviously shifted from helping cafes set up hotspots. That's kind of still has its place, but maybe isn't the focus as much. And we're doing a lot of setting up free internet access for patients and family at hospitals and different community centers. And that requires kind of a bit more expertise around wiring and running some of these networks that are a little bit larger, and that somehow are not really attractive for commercial players that much, or at least no one's knocking, knocking down their doors, getting them to set up internet access. So we have, we've, continuing to kind of learn some interesting things about getting access, to families and hospitals, and the realities of an IT system for the hospital. Where does, this convenience be, where does that fit for people that are, with their family members for long periods of time that are sick, and need to go online. So I think there's a lot. I guess my general feeling about this area is that it's an understudied issue, and I kind of wish that this conversation had taken place 12 years ago, right? And again, for the people that have been doing this work for a long time that are in this community already, it's great to see this. But to think about why this isn't being looked at for a while, I think partially because it's about poor people or marginalized people, and that is never of interest to dominant players, and also just a lack of interest in technology. So I thought it was interesting seeing when there was a Syrian refugee response, all the different opinions about whether or not people had hardware, needed training, didn't need training. There was radically different ideas about what type of expertise is available. And it was interesting. It was certainly interesting to see a kind of policymakers seem to be caught flat-footed on this question of internet access, and seem to be throwing things at the wall a little bit with it. I think I think library is obviously a key part of the question, and then who else is in contact with marginalized peoples? Having cafes and Tim Hortons set up everywhere, that's great. There is a lot of accessibility to Tim Hortons. I think it's really important to think about the difference between a Tim Hortons and a Starbucks, and who gets to hang around and who feels comfortable. So I think that is a very relevant question for policymakers. When we think about libraries, we need to think about content filtering. That's a hugely important question, right? Libraries are kind of obligated to do content filtering, and there's really good reasons for that. But what does that mean to us? Or there's not really good reasons, Paul, Tim, for libraries to do content reason that we shouldn't. But like that is, to me, there's a question there that even we've spun around with over the years when our partners have asked for that, and some questions about that. So I think there's this needs to be paid a bit more attention to as an issue, and certainly a library is a big part of it. But I think there's questions. I think I would look back to the Connecting Canadians program, and specifically the community access programs, and and pulling from those lessons as well.
So there's so many threads I want to pick up on, but maybe just for the benefit of who's listening, Michael, could you in a short sentence or two, how is your network that you helped? You said it was volunteer. Like, who's paying for it? Like, how did it come to be?
Sure. So super brief. ILS Sans Fil, there was probably about 150 community networks that started out before us. These Wi-Fi routers started to come out in late 90s, probably more 2000s, and they dropped in price a lot. So they were suddenly this accessible device, but we do have good broadband coverage in Canada, and we had that back in the day. Again, our dial-up coverage was better, I think, than our broadband coverage, to where we ranked among other countries. But we had fairly decent broadband coverage across Canada, not compared to countries like Korea and stuff. So we just came along and asked for cafe owners that had internet access set up in the back for their office, or for their sometimes for their cash payment machines, and asked them to make that available to the public, and then assisted them in doing that, charged them a fee of $100 a year or something back when they started, and they would pay for the equipment, which probably cost I think $125 back then. But we reinstalled the firmware on that and created a network of these hotspots, and then made that map available to the public, and showed people they could live see whether the hotspot was up or down, when they were thinking about going there. And then it was just a lot of promotion. So operated, these hundreds of hotspots, let people know that was going on, and worked with different, that was just how we started up. After then, started working with commercial arteries, business improvement agencies to set up free Wi-Fi in public and different public spaces. So we've gone from there.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So there's some follow-up questions for Alice, and I'm going to try my best to summarize them. But one is, Alice, the idea of public internet access as a public utility that a municipality would provide is not commonly held across Canada. So, how has Toronto made this breakthrough? If you could give some sense of that, and I guess as somebody who watched it up close, I think Alice's leadership is a big part of that, and she probably won't say that, so I wanted to say that. And then a bit more detail about the work that you're doing. So, how are you involved in research around how to make connectivity more efficient through the work you're going to do? Maybe that's probably enough questions combined. So how about that?
Sure, very quickly. I think the pandemic's really changed our perspective. It's shook us to our core to see people in the snow trying to get a signal out of the public libraries, etc. And we heard so many stories, like I'm sure you've all heard, about people how it's really adversely affected their lives. And Pam has told me this before, right? I think one of the first times Pam and I met, she said, "This is our library loaning program. It's always maxed out because there's such a need in our city." So, but really, honestly, it's the COVID has really made us realize just the scope and depth of the situation, and learn. And to your second question about how do we how are we learning more on this topic? We are working with great folks like Sam, and we're continue to do a couple capstone projects in the fall to continue to look at the issue. And we also are very lucky to be part of Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. Pam, this will ring a bell. And sorry, Vancouver and Montreal, we were the first city to join the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. You're welcome to join. And so we're learning a ton from the other cities. Like just this morning, we had a call with Barcelona on some of their initiatives and trying to figure out how to do better and learn from them. So it's a combination of learning with in our city here, international groups, and we're also working with other cities across Canada through a group called it's called BICEP. I know it's cheesy, but it's Big Cities Across Canada, where we have established a group from Vancouver to Halifax to think about how digital infrastructure can be leveraged to produce public good. So learning all over.
Awesome. I want to pick up the question because it's been a bit on the Jamboard as well about the role and obligations of the providers. And I'm sure the libraries deal with this. Michael, you mentioned content filtering, but there's also privacy and security considerations. And, there's some evidence in Canada that people don't trust public Wi-Fi as much, and about the role that it plays in doing sensitive interactions. So do people want to respond to that question and concern about how to address that?
Pam, do you want to?
I can speak a little bit about that. So yeah, just for clarity, I think Christina had put in the chat that requirements for content filtering in libraries vary across Canada, and they can be either provincially regulated or local public libraries are generally governed by library boards. It could be a board requirement. Computers in Toronto Public Library, we do not have filtering. That is a core for us, tenant of access to information and intellectual freedom. And our children's computers, though, do have filtering on them if that's what parents would like their children to use, but children are welcome to use any computer in the library. And as well, we provide access to the Tor browser. We're the only public library in Canada that permits that, because we think that your online activity and your digital privacy are just as important as that access to information. So, we have worked with a number of organizations to make that so, and we just want to continue to expand that access. But we developed a whole digital privacy series of programming and supports in partnership with community partners to be able to ensure people know what their risks are when they are using public internet, when they are surfing online or putting their banking information into places. And those are core and key programs, and we've developed a number of modules and put them online so that they're accessible at any time. And that is a core piece that we will continue to expand on. I just wanted to mention Alice's comment about the Cities for Digital Rights. when Toronto became a signatory on that, and I encourage you to all go and look at it, they very generously included that a full-time position should be given to Toronto Public Library to further develop the public programming around Cities for Digital Rights principles. So I'm just going to read off a couple of those of what they are. So the principles, which we will all agree on, are universal and equal access to the internet and digital literacy, privacy, data protection, and security, so this topic we're talking about right now, transparency, accountability, and non-discrimination of data, content, and algorithms. So we have developed a whole algorithmic literacy programming series as well. So what does it mean when I always say those brown boots are following you around the internet? Because I searched for these brown boots once and they followed me for like a year in every search that I did. Participatory democracy, diversity and inclusion, and then open and ethical digital service standards. So those are guiding principles that will lead a whole bunch of our public programming for the foreseeable future and in partnership with the city.
Anybody else want to get in on that question?
Sure. Just to touch on a couple of other things, and also to mention libraries across Canada, I believe, many of them would offer courses on privacy and security. And so whether you're in Toronto or Vancouver or another part of the country, it is something that you can seek out at your public library to learn about privacy and security issues and understand when you should be making those choices of perhaps library Wi-Fi versus Starbucks Wi-Fi, and that they're not the same. And so asking those questions and understanding those choices and when you might be better off on a public computer rather than using a Wi-Fi network. So so that's one thing to think about. The other, there was a bit of that question was about the obligations of providers. And one of the things that our staff brought up when I asked them about issues related to the digital divide was that a lot of people at lower income levels or coming from communities that don't feel as empowered don't think or realize they can negotiate prices. And so those of us with a greater facility with negotiation and a greater feeling that we can demand more, will get into negotiations about, do you not have a better price than this? Is there not another option for this internet plan? And there are a lot of people who don't know to ask those questions. And so there are these affordable internet plans out there that are not well understood. And then there are the cheaper shadow plans that our telecom providers offer, but that a lot of people don't even know to ask. And so they end up putting too much of their money into having home internet access. And so I think that that is really quite important, is that it should be possible to find some kind of home internet plan that is not hidden from those who need it the most, and that we make it a little bit too difficult, and that that those telecom providers and all of these connecting family type initiatives, they're addressing, requiring that you provide income evidence. They're narrow to particular groups. So it's often families who are on some kind of benefit or people with disabilities who are on some kind of benefit, but they make it hard to get that access and to understand that it's possible. And so that is something that needs to change.
Thank you. Oh, Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, just I've been in this, again, I haven't been focused on this space as much recently, but what Alice, you're talking about Toronto's doing is I understand the term of setting up condo fiber, building out the fiber network in the city of Toronto and making that available to external partners in different ways. That's kind of the thing. I find that stuff really hard to understand, and I spend a lot of time just doing, software development, technology stuff. I have a decent understanding of the internet, and I find condo stuff fairly confusing. When we think about the city of Toronto's last foray into municipal internet access, that was short-lived with Toronto Hydro, right? The smart city initiatives are great, but they're pretty slippery in my experience. And even Sam, your remark about how Toronto had the top internet speed in Canada, I bet you can find 3 different ways to say it's 3 different cities in Toronto with that methodology. So I think this requires some really deep understanding of technology and policy. And I don't know if the people are there following this the way that it needs to follow. You know, the CRTC I try to follow the CRTC stuff around their digital divide plans, the way that, you know, people in this community have been doing. And I just find it a very tricky policy issue. The feds want to have something done. The telcos want money from the feds and don't want to lose any opportunity. So they have these deals to be able to expand coverage. It doesn't seem like they work that well. And it just seems like, you know, that question about where are our leaders? You know, there is this change happening of our leaders in the social sector focusing on this issue, but I just think there's very few people that have a solid understanding of policy issues around this. So again, it's calling for what you're doing, but I don't think that should be missed. It's a complicated issue, and the private sector obviously has a huge role to play, and it changes. You know, you can see the entry of Elon Musk. How has Starlink changed the policy discussion, or should it not have? I don't know, and I'd love to know, you know, who has those answers.
Fair enough. Okay, and I also there's a really interesting thread in the chat that is going on that I just want to recognize around the history of the community wireless networks in the early 2000s. And Catherine Middleton, a fantastic expert at Ryerson, threw in the chat a link to a great summary of that. And who, by the way, Catherine has been a great partner with the city as well. And so, but I do want to move now to our second question, and you've each touched on it a bit, and so we don't need to retread everything, but there are particular groups that are currently benefiting from public Wi-Fi disproportionately. You know, how can we recognize that, work on that explicitly, and how could it be improved and broadened? So who wants to jump in on that? And by the way, for those contributing on the Jamboards, which are jammed, which is great, there is arrows at the top, and you can click over to the next slides to add more. But anybody want to jump in on this second question?
I'm always happy to try and get things started. I'll try not to take all the library points and just focus on one. And so no matter what we do with connectivity to people's homes, we won't have addressed the issues of people who are homeless. And so in Vancouver, that's obviously really important. And it is something that we want to solve at the level of getting more people into homes and into stable homes, because that is a really big piece of this. It would be much better to have everyone in homes where they then also had internet connections. However, in the state where we are right now, and that is really the group that is most likely to get continued long-term benefit from having public internet access. And there are a couple of things that can help to improve it. So first of all, the more we provide and get that affordable access into homes, the more it frees up the public computers in public libraries for the people who need them the most. And that's something that we've seen as a benefit over the past five or 8 years, I would say, is that there's been reduced demand on public computers in libraries, and that has meant we've been able to give people more time on them. So not everyone is aware that public computer access in libraries is limited. And so people can typically, in Vancouver at our branches, use up to 2 hours of time. And before COVID, we could provide sometimes up to 4 hours at our central library, where we have hundreds of computers relative to it might be 2 at one of our smaller branches. So that ability to lengthen that time when there isn't high use happening of the computers is a really big benefit for people. It lets them have those opportunities to participate in online learning. And that online learning leads to new skills, which leads to better employment and hopefully solves those longer term challenges in their lives. So I think that is one that we really can think about, is just the ability to give people more time on public computers and make sure that it's easy to access and that support is there. And then I think we've covered a number of the other points, so I'll leave it to Pam to fill in on other library related themes.
Thanks, Christina. Absolutely, completely agree. And then I think, I'm just going to go back to the comment I had made earlier around continuing to try and reduce the barriers. So for the folks who can't come into the library, who won't come into the library, whose lives are just so complicated that having to do that as well is just not an option, that we be where they are. So whether that's in shelters, we've had community librarians and family shelters who do programs or one-on-ones for job supports or resume building or interview prep, or increasingly hoping to be working in family shelters and having people leave family shelters with a device, with connectivity, that be all part of the complicated puzzle. We all know that those last people, the people that they're the hardest to find, and the ones who need the most supports and the most detailed and hands-on supports and services, that those are the folks that we need to, if we're using an equity lens for digital equity, they're going to take up a lot more of our time and resources to be able to ensure that they are supported.
Michael or Alice, you want to jump in on this? You don't have to. No.
Michael, did you want to go, or?
No, I feel like I've spoken enough recently. Thank you.
Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say, we hope that ultimately everybody benefits from digitally inclusive Toronto or Canada, right? So that's the vision that we're setting out to move forward. And I agree with you, Michael, that it's hard to wrap your mind around how does the city building more fiber resources, like, how does that help for the digital divide in the big picture? Because there's already fiber here in Toronto. There's places, there's almost every corner you can get, in theory, high-speed internet. But I think the situation is, and through Sam's research, is people can't afford the prices. People can't afford the high-speed internet's being offered. So this is just the city's way of trying to leverage what we have, which is what you have, which is the public assets, to be part of that solution, to be part of that equation, so that's our input. So ultimately, we're still trying to see what works and what doesn't work. We've had a great discussion with some of our community members a couple of weeks ago in an information gathering session, hearing from, asking people, what do you think works here? Is it a community-based? Is it telecoms? Who should we include? How do we get this conversation to the right people? And how do we help us build this together? So I know we're running out of time, but I just want to plug that if you're interested in the topic, please connect with myself and my team. You can visit our website, which I'll provide, as well as just email us, and we're happy to have a conversation and learn from you. Thanks.
Thanks, Alice. And there's a question in the chat. We will be sending an email to all participants with a link to the video, to the transcript, as well as some of the resources that are being shared in the chat. So don't worry about that. I do want to ask maybe one final question, and anybody can answer, but Alice, I'd be particularly interested in your perspectives given the city's direction. But through this workshop series, we've been, I would say, wrestling with the role of competition in driving down price, and our market-based system, and public subsidies, which basically Canada has essentially none, to offer low-cost plans to people who need it. And these aren't binary things, obviously, but you can do both. But could you talk a bit more about why the Toronto decided to go the route it did in building out ConnectTO? And I guess anybody else who wants to jump in on, if you were in charge of, designing how people should connect to low-cost internet, is it subsidies? Is it building out public competition? Both, I guess, perspectives on that. I feel like I'm seeing quite a bit of that in some of the reflections. So let's have that be the last question.
So we're learning about that, right? Actually, Dr. Middleton and her team has been teaching us about that. And actually, just getting some more research on that now. So we are trying to do many things at the same time and seeing what works out well. In addition to the lower cost, like affordable home internet, we're also pushing out a lot of public Wi-Fi initiatives, and we just talked about the drawbacks from public Wi-Fi versus secure home Wi-Fi. So we're definitely trying to understand what works for the end user, what works for the public, and so all of those options are something we're pursuing. And so when you ask the question, why did you decide this way? We didn't really decide on one way or the other. What we're trying to do is learn from this and give recommendations to council for their consideration for the larger program overall. And I imagine they'll continue to ask us to do sort of a little bit of each of the aspects. And should there be funding coming from the federal or provincial government, we'd be very happy to use our existing resources, abilities to give that to the public.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Michael.
So yeah, I didn't. Catherine's certainly one of the people who's been studying this for a long time. And it's great that we can benefit. People working on this can benefit from that track record of work or that experience. We're selling, like, this is why I think it's a complicated policy issue, because should we be giving more money to telcos to extend coverage at different prices? We already regulate a bunch of these prices, and we give telcos, we give them, we sell the spectrum at certain price points. So those are public resources, those spectrum, and we get specific, we have demands in return for that. And from my understanding, those, the arrangements that the government's made with extending coverage have continuously not, have there been problems in hitting those targets. So should we be spending more money on a different vehicle to extend coverage? That's where I think it's really difficult to get involved in that policy conversation. And I struggle to actually form an informed opinion on it. This question of like, I know that TELUS or different organizations have this low cost rate. What is that obligation? What is the corporate obligation or the legal obligation on them to advertise that? And are there targets for that? Are we hitting those targets? It's the same thing with Toronto. Sorry, Alice, I didn't mean to say the condo project wasn't a good one. That's the only way that we're going to have easy, low-cost social housing connectivity, is if there's actually able to leverage these networks. So it's fantastic the city's doing that. What I'm suggesting is that a lot of these projects are not going to be successful. They haven't been successful in the past, and there needs to be a continued involvement on following this up and learning from them. And that's what I feel is me missing, except for maybe the few people that be doing that work. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay.
And just as a last comment, I just wanted to draw attention to, because I was going to mention it, but Toby Harper-Merrick put it in the chat. His article on access to high-speed infrastructure is not the only barrier to connectivity. It's a great article, great overview of the complexities here. While I'm certainly not an expert in this area, I think we can only expect that it's going to have to be many solutions, jigsaw puzzled together, and not one solution. So basically, anybody who's got a good idea and a possibility, we should be trying it now to see what role it could potentially play in that overall jigsaw.
Awesome. Christine, any final word? Are you good?
I'll just mention what I had put in the chat was that I think we don't know as individuals what we can do to help bridge the digital divide, and yet many people are involved in a website in one way or another. And one thing that you can look at on your own website is how to improve its accessibility for those who have visual impairments, who are using a website through a screen reader or some other adaptive equipment, and just taking a look at that and testing it with some of those tools that are out there can make a big difference to enabling the bridging of the digital divide for people who do have some kind of visual impairment. And so I'd encourage people, if you want to take one small action for an organization website, to take a look at doing that.
Yeah, that's a great flag. Well, thank you so much. And I think, as Michael said, these are complicated things. Part of why we're doing this workshop series is to try to workshop and gather all these ideas. And so the Jamboard will remain open. So feel free to continue to provide your input and link back to it. And we're going to do our best to summarize what we heard today and in our next workshop, and then in the final wrap up of this series, and make it widely available. We will be reconvening in 3 weeks' time. Our final workshop is about youth and digital skills, which is on at the same time, Wednesday, June 23rd at 12 noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. You can register using the link in the chat. And actually, as was mentioned by Nicole in the chat, that's actually one day after Statistics Canada will release the next batch of results from the 2020 Canadian Internet Use Survey. And so we're also going to, at that session, do our best to provide a summary of what we have learned from those results. So we're excited about that. We hope that you can join us for our final one in 3 weeks. Thanks everyone for your participation today, and we hope you have a great day.